The sound of laughter echoed across the busy street. A uniformed police officer stood with his arms crossed, smirking at a young girl no older than 12. She wore plain clothes, clutching a small school bag, her eyes wide but unshaken. "So, you're telling me," the cop chuckled loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "that your father is a professional boxer?" The bystanders burst into laughter. Some shook their heads, others whispered, "Kids these days always making up stories." The girl nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. My dad is a boxer." The cop leaned forward, towering over her. "Oh, really? And what's his name? Muhammad Ali? Mike Tyson?" He laughed again, this time slapping his knee for effect. The crowd followed, enjoying the mockery. But the girl didn't flinch. She simply looked him straight in the eyes and said softly, "His name is Manny Pacquiao." Silence. The laughter slowed, replaced by confused chuckles. A man in the crowd snorted, "Manny Pacquiao, the world champion? Don't be ridiculous." The cop's smirk widened into a full-blown grin. "Manny Pacquiao? That's your dad?" "Little girl, if your father was Manny Pacquiao, you wouldn't be standing here on the street with that torn backpack and those cheap shoes. Stop lying. Tell the truth." Whispers rolled through the gathering like a wave. Some people shook their heads, dismissing her claim. Others looked at her with pity. Still, the girl didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't cry. She simply smiled, a calm, patient smile. "Just wait," she said quietly. "You'll see." The cop laughed again, but this time his voice cracked with a hint of irritation. "Oh, I'll see? What, is the champ himself going to walk down this road right now? Come on, kid, stop the fairy tales." The crowd roared with laughter again. The girl, however, turned her head slowly toward the corner of the street. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, measured. The kind of footsteps that made the noise of the street dim for a second, as though the world itself leaned in to listen. The crowd's laughter softened. Several heads turned. A shadow stretched across the pavement, long and unmistakable. The cop stopped mid-laugh. His grin froze. Someone was coming. And the girl's smile widened. The street outside the central bus station was alive with noise and movement. Vendors called out to passers-by, selling roasted peanuts, bottled water, and second-hand books stacked high on plastic crates. Jeepneys rumbled past in a blur of bright paint and exhaust smoke, their drivers shouting for passengers. The afternoon sun dipped low, painting the cracked pavement in golden streaks. Right at the heart of this chaos stood the little girl. Her uniform was simple, the collar slightly frayed, her shoes dusty from walking long distances. A pink ribbon tied her hair back, though a few loose strands framed her determined face. She looked ordinary, almost invisible, the kind of child most people wouldn't notice twice. But today, all eyes were on her. Around her, a small crowd had gathered. Office workers on their way home, a few college students with earphones dangling around their necks, 2 street vendors who had abandoned their stalls just to watch the drama unfold. Their body language was mixed. Some leaned forward with eager grins, others crossed their arms with skepticism, while a few simply waited, curious to see how far the girl's claim would go. And then there was the cop. His uniform was neatly pressed, but sweat stains clung to the collar. His voice carried an authority sharpened by years of shouting commands. He had the kind of posture that spoke of discipline, yet his smirk betrayed a habit of enjoying power over those smaller, weaker, or more vulnerable. The girl clutched her backpack tighter. Inside, her notebooks were filled with scribbles of schoolwork and doodles of boxing gloves, childish drawings of a man in the ring, hands raised in victory. She had no jewelry, no sign of wealth, nothing to convince anyone that she was the daughter of someone famous. Only her unwavering gaze suggested that her words were not the product of fantasy. The crowd waited. The air was thick with curiosity. Some whispered under their breath, "She's lying. Poor kid. Maybe she just wants attention." No, look at her eyes, she believes it. A man selling lottery tickets sighed and shook his head. If she really was Pacquiao's daughter, she wouldn't be standing here arguing with a cop. But the girl said nothing more. Her silence created tension. the kind that grows heavier with every passing second. She didn't shout, didn't try to prove herself. She simply stood tall in her smallness, patient as though she knew something. The others didn't, and that patience unsettled the cop. He adjusted his cap, narrowing his eyes at her. "Why aren't you scared, little one? Most kids your age would be crying by now." The girl smiled faintly. It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet certainty. A jeepney honked in the distance. The sound of a basketball bouncing echoed from a nearby alley. The city moved on, but here, in this circle of tension, time seemed to slow. The first hint of change arrived subtly. A few in the crowd stopped laughing. Their eyes shifted toward the corner of the street, the place the girl had been glancing at all along. Something was coming. The environment itself seemed to notice. A vendor dropped a bottle and didn't bother picking it up. A child tugged at his mother's arm, whispering. Even the stray dog lying in the shade lifted its head, and through the noise of the city, those same deliberate footsteps grew louder. The stage was set. The ordinary street was about to become extraordinary. The laughter began again, sharper this time, as if the crowd had gained confidence from the cop's authority. He adjusted his belt and stepped closer to the girl, his boots heavy against the pavement. "Listen here," he said, pointing a finger directly at her. "Don't waste my time with stories. Manny Pacquiao doesn't have daughters walking around in cheap uniforms waiting on sidewalks. Do you think we're fools?" The girl blinked but didn't look away. Her small hands tightened around the straps of her bag. "I'm not lying, sir. He really is my dad." The cop's lips curled. "Then where is he, huh? Where's the champ now? Why hasn't he come to pick you up in his big car with bodyguards? Maybe he's too busy fighting in Las Vegas to care about you." He laughed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The crowd chuckled nervously. A college student leaned to his friend and muttered, "She's definitely making it up." An older woman frowned, shaking her head. "Poor thing, she probably just wishes it were true." Others weren't so kind. "Liar," someone whispered. "Attention seeker," another said. "Crazy kid." Every word cut the air like a blade, but the girl didn't flinch. She stood rooted, her shoulders straight, her chin slightly lifted, as if refusing to be crushed under their disbelief. The cop, unsatisfied with her calmness, pushed further. He bent down, lowering his face close to hers so that the crowd could hear every word. "Do you know what happens to liars, little girl? They embarrass themselves. And right now, you're embarrassing yourself in front of everyone." The crowd laughed louder, emboldened by his cruelty. A boy in the back even clapped mockingly. But the girl smiled. It wasn't a loud smile, not the grin of someone trying to prove a point. It was soft, almost serene, like someone who knew that truth didn't need defending. Her lips curved gently, her eyes shining with a strange mix of sadness and confidence. That smile unsettled him. "What are you smiling at?" The cop snapped. "You think this is funny?" She shook her head. "No, I just know you'll see soon." Her voice was steady. It wasn't the voice of a frightened child. It was the voice of someone who believed deeply in what she was saying. The whispers in the crowd grew restless. Some were irritated by her calmness, others oddly intrigued. One man whispered to another, "She's too confident. What if—" But before he could finish, the cop silenced the thought with a booming laugh. He placed a hand on his holster, dramatically as though to show his dominance. "All right then, little Miss Pacquiao, we're all waiting. Show us your world champion father, or admit you're lying." The girl said nothing. She only glanced again toward the corner of the street. The cop followed her gaze and scoffed. "Still waiting for a miracle? Grow up." His words were harsh, almost spitting. The crowd murmured in agreement, though less certain than before. Some were entertained, others uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. No one defended her. And in that silence, the injustice hung heavy. A child, mocked for telling the truth. A crowd, blind with judgment. A man in uniform, abusing his power. And yet, she remained calm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't Cry. She didn't argue. She only smiled again. A smile that seemed to whisper, "Wait, just wait." The street seemed to split into sides. The moment the cop raised his voice, the crowd responded like ripples in water. Some louder, some softer, but everyone contributing to the storm of reactions. "Come on, girl. Just admit it," one man said, folding his arms. "You're lying. No way Pacquiao's daughter looks like this." Another woman giggled. If she really was, she'd be in a fancy car by now, not waiting in the heat like the rest of us. Their words stabbed the air, each one like a stone tossed her way. The cops smirked, encouraged by the support, but not everyone agreed. From the edge of the crowd, a mother with a baby strapped to her chest frowned. "Why are you bullying her? She's just a child." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a note of disapproval that made a few people glance at her. The cop ignored it. "She brought it on herself," someone else muttered. "Don't defend liars." The baby cooed, and the mother shook her head. "Or maybe she's telling the truth, and none of you want to believe her." The tension thickened. Group of students whispered among themselves. One boy snickered, "She's crazy." But his friend bit his lip and said softly, "I don't know. Look at her face. She's not scared. She really believes it." The difference in opinion divided the crowd into layers: mockers, defenders, and those who hovered in the middle, unsure which way to lean. The girl remained still, standing like a quiet flame in the wind. Her face betrayed nothing but patience. Her small smile lingered, though her eyes seemed to watch every reaction around her. She didn't fight back. She didn't beg. And that silence was powerful. The ones who mocked grew louder, as if trying to fill the quiet with their noise. The ones who doubted themselves grew uneasy. And those who defended her found their voices wavering in the face of ridicule. The cop leaned back, letting the crowd do the work for him. "See? Nobody believes you," he said smugly. But even as he spoke, a few faces in the crowd softened. An old man near the peanut stand squinted at the girl, his lips pursed. "There's something about her," he muttered. "She's not bluffing. I've seen liars before. She's not one." No one paid him attention. The louder voices drowned him out. "Stop pretending. You're wasting our time. Go home, little girl." Each comment was a stone, each laugh another cut, and yet she didn't shrink. She didn't even frown. Instead, she kept her gaze on the corner of the street, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Her patience unsettled people. The crowd's laughter wavered, became inconsistent. Even the mockers stole quick glances in the same direction she kept watching. A child clinging to his father's leg asked innocently, "Daddy, what if she's telling the truth?" The father hushed him quickly, embarrassed, but the question lingered, hanging above the crowd like a faint echo. And slowly the crowd grew quieter. The mocking voices lost their rhythm. The laughter faded into uneasy chuckles. A handful of people who had been cruel now crossed their arms defensively, avoiding eye contact. It wasn't guilt yet, but something was shifting. The girl's silence was winning. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to argue. Her patience spoke louder than words. Her smile, gentle and steady, began to chip away at the certainty of those who doubted her. Still, the cop refused to back down. He puffed out his chest, raising his voice again, determined to crush her calmness. "You're wasting everybody's time, kid. Stop pretending before you embarrass yourself further." But even as he barked his words, the energy of the crowd wasn't the same. Where there had been only mockery, now there was hesitation. Where there had been laughter, now there were whispers. Where there had been certainty, now there was doubt. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably, and the girl knew it. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply as though the chaos around her couldn't touch her. When she opened them again, her calm smile remained. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, glancing between her and the corner of the street. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The cop tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. The noise of the city faded in the background. The waiting grew heavier. Something or someone was about to change everything. The footsteps grew clearer now, echoing against the cracked pavement with a weight that silenced even the whispers. One by one, the crowd turned their heads toward the corner, and then he appeared. A man in a plain white shirt, loose jeans, and worn-out sneakers. No flashy jewelry, no expensive car waiting behind him. He carried nothing but the air of someone who had walked this road many times before. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, almost ordinary, except for the eyes. Those eyes, sharp and steady, belonged to someone who had seen battle after battle and lived to tell the tale. At first, the crowd didn't recognize him. To them, he looked like any other man from the neighborhood, walking home after a long day. But the girl's face lit up instantly. She dropped her bag and ran toward him, her smile breaking through all the mockery she had endured. "Papa." The man bent slightly, patting her head with tenderness, his other hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make any grand gesture. He simply looked at her, nodded, and then let his gaze shift to the crowd. Silence. Every mocking word, every whisper, every laugh, it all seemed to freeze. The cop's grin faltered. His eyes narrowed, trying to place the man's face. But Manny Pacquiao didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he stood quietly, observing. His daughter clung to his side, her earlier calmness now explained. She hadn't needed to argue, hadn't needed to prove herself. She had been waiting for this moment all along. Manny's silence carried weight. He didn't glare, he didn't challenge anyone. He simply looked at the faces around him, the mocking students, the whispering vendors, the embarrassed parents. His eyes moved slowly, reading each expression like words in a book. The crowd shifted uncomfortably under that gaze. And then, almost, without meaning to, the narration seemed to slip into the air. Not Manny's voice, but the quiet reflection of the scene itself. What would you do if this was your child? What if the world mocked her, called her a liar, made her feel small, only because they judged her by appearance? Would you still laugh, or would you stand by her side? The words weren't spoken aloud, but the question hovered heavy in the silence. The cop coughed, trying to break the tension. "So, this is your father? This ordinary man?" He smirked again, though less confident than before. Manny didn't respond. He let the silence linger. He let the cop squirm in it. The crowd, however, began to notice. A few eyes widened in recognition. The sharp jawline, the distinctive eyes, the familiar stance. Something about him clicked in their memories. Whispers started. "Wait, is that... No, it can't be. He looks familiar." But Manny still said nothing. He crouched down slightly, looking at his daughter, brushing dust from her cheek. Then he stood again, folding his hands casually in front of him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was patient. The cop's smirk faltered further. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cap. His confidence drained under Manny's quietness. He wanted a fight, an argument, a loud defense, but he got none. Only silence. And in that silence, the crowd began to reflect. The mother with the baby bit her lip, guilt rising in her chest for not stepping in sooner. The old man by the peanut stand nodded slowly, vindicated in his earlier instinct. The children, in the back, stared wide-eyed, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. And Manny simply watched. His stillness was more powerful than any punch he had ever thrown in the ring. Because here, in this ordinary street, he wasn't a champion, fighting for titles. He was a father standing beside his daughter, proving her truth without saying a single word. Again, the narration returned, not from him, but from the story itself, pressing into the hearts of those watching. Sometimes strength isn't in raising your fists. Sometimes it isn't even in raising your voice. True strength is in patience, in waiting, in letting truth reveal itself. The question echoed again, louder in the silence of thought. If you were in his place, would you have stayed calm? Would you have let your child's truth defend itself? Or would you have snapped back in anger? The crowd shuffled, uneasy. The laughter was gone now. What remained was curiosity and a growing sense of shame. And still, Manny said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was already speaking louder than words. The silence was suffocating. The crowd had fallen into a hush, their earlier laughter evaporating into something more uneasy. Manny stood calmly, his daughter by his side, while the cop shifted uncomfortably under the weight of those quiet eyes. Finally, the officer scoffed, forcing a chuckle. "What? You think standing there silently makes you important? Who are you supposed to be?" Manny tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. His voice, when it came, was soft. "I'm just her father." The girl leaned into him, nodding with pride. The crowd stirred, their curiosity rising. The cop smirked again, trying to regain control. "Her father, huh? She says you're some kind of big-shot boxer, Manny Pacquiao, she claims." He gestured dismissively at Manny's plain clothes. "But you don't look like a champion. You look like any other man walking the streets, so tell me, are you encouraging her lies?" Manny didn't react to the insult. Instead, he asked calmly, "Why does the way I look matter so much to you?" The cop blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Manny's tone remained gentle. "You judged my daughter because of her shoes, her bag, her simple clothes. Now you're judging me for the same." "Why?" The officer bristled. "Because it's obvious. Rich men don't walk around dressed like this. Famous men don't wait at bus stops. You're either lying or maybe," Manny interrupted, softly, "you don't know what humility looks like." The words struck deeper than the volume suggested. The crowd murmured, some nodding. The cop's face flushed. "You think you're clever?" he snapped. "You think you can make me look foolish in front of everyone? Let's be honest. You're nobody. If you were who she claims, you'd prove it right now." Manny looked at his daughter, then back at the cop. His eyes remained steady. "Do I need to prove who I am for you to treat a child with respect?" The officer froze. His lips parted, but no words came. The crowd shifted, their weight moving from one foot to the other. That single question hung heavy in the air. The people who had mocked the girl earlier now felt it cut into them as well. The cop forced a laugh, his voice shaky. "Respect? Respect has to be earned. And liars. Respect is given to everyone." Manny interrupted again, still calm. "Even if they're weak, even if they're small, even if they're wrong, you give respect not because of who they are, but because of who you are." The crowd gasped quietly. It was no punch, no flashy move, but the words landed like a strike to the gut. The officer's jaw tightened. His pride fought against the stillness of the man in front of him. You talk big, but this is the real world. People lie. People pretend. You can't just go around believing every story." Manny nodded slowly. "That's true, but tell me, what do you lose if you show kindness first before judgment?" The officer hesitated, his fists clenched at his sides. Manny stepped a little closer, his voice lowering so only those in the immediate circle could hear clearly. "You wear a uniform that gives you power, but power without compassion is just cruelty. Is that the kind of officer you want to be remembered as?" The question hit harder than any accusation. The cop looked around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes on him. The same crowd that had laughed with him earlier now stared silently, waiting for his response. The girl squeezed her father's hand, her small smile unbroken. The officer barked back, desperate to regain control. "You think you're some philosopher? Some holy man? This is nonsense. If you're really who you say you are, prove it." Manny exhaled slowly. He shook his head, almost with sadness. Why is it always proof that people want and not truth? Why is it so hard to believe someone without demanding they fight for your approval? He wasn't angry. His tone wasn't loud, but each word landed heavier than the last. The officer swallowed, his pride trembling under the weight of that calmness. He looked around, hoping someone in the crowd would laugh, would join him, would keep the mockery alive. But the crowd was changing. Faces once lit with amusement now carried shame or awe or both. One voice from the back whispered almost reverently, "It is him." The ripple spread quickly. "Wait, look closely. That stance. Those eyes. It really is Manny Pacquiao." The officer's eyes widened, his confidence cracked. He glanced from Manny to the crowd, then back again. Manny didn't say a word. He let the whispers grow on their own. Instead, he turned back to the cop and asked one final, simple question. "If you had known who I was before today, would you have treated my daughter differently?" The officer froze, his throat tightened. The answer was obvious, but it was also damning. The crowd waited. Manny's eyes stayed locked on his, calm but unyielding. "Think carefully," he said softly. "Because the way you answer doesn't reveal who I am. It reveals who you are." The cop's hands shook at his sides. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The silence was louder than any response he could give, and Manny, still, patient, unshaken, watched. The cop stood frozen, Manny's last question ringing in his ears. His mouth opened, but no words came. The silence stretched, and for the first time since the scene began, the authority in his uniform seemed smaller than the truth standing before him. The crowd waited. Some looked at Manny with admiration, but others began to look at the officer differently. They didn't see arrogance anymore. They saw something else. Fear. And in that tension, something inside the officer cracked. He took a step back, his shoulders sagging. His voice, when it came, was no longer loud or mocking. It was quieter, almost defensive. "You don't understand. People lie to me every day. I've heard every story. I can't afford to believe them all." Manny didn't answer. He simply nodded slightly, inviting him to continue. The cop glanced around, then lowered his gaze, his pride battling with the pressure of so many eyes. And then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "I wasn't always like this," he muttered. "But life has a way of hardening you." The crowd leaned in. The officer's mind drifted back, and his story unfolded like a reel of film. He saw himself as a boy, growing up in a cramped wooden house by the railway tracks. His father was a laborer who came home drunk more often than not. His mother sold vegetables in the market, her hands rough and blistered. They barely scraped by. He remembered the shame of going to school with torn shoes, classmates laughing at him. He remembered the nights when dinner was nothing but rice and salt, and worst of all, he remembered the fights at home, the shouting, the broken bottles, the tears of his mother as she tried to hold the family together. "I swore I'd never live like that," the officer said quietly, his eyes distant. "I swore I'd wear a uniform one day, have power, never be laughed at again." Years passed. He became a policeman, proud in his new uniform. But the reality was harsher than his dreams. The pay was low, the hours were long, the streets were cruel. Every day he dealt with thieves, liars, and desperate people spinning stories to escape the law. At first he tried to help. He tried to listen. But every kindness was betrayed. Every soft heart was taken advantage of. Slowly, compassion turned into suspicion. "People think the badge makes you powerful," he said bitterly. "But most days, it just makes you a target. Everyone wants something from you, everyone lies to you." The memory darkened further. A rainy night. A young man begging him for mercy after stealing medicine for his sick mother. The cop had believed him, had let him go. But the next day, the same man was caught selling the medicine for drugs. The betrayal cut deep. "That was the day I stopped believing," the officer whispered. "Stopped trusting. I told myself, no more. From then on, I'd see through every lie, crush every story, never let anyone fool me again." The flashback faded, and the officer stood once more in the present, his eyes heavy with years of bitterness. The crowd was silent. No one laughed now. No one mocked. They listened, their earlier judgment softening into something closer to pity. The officer looked at Manny at last, his voice trembling. "So when your daughter said those words, all I saw was another lie. Another story. I didn't see innocence, I saw a trick. I've been living in a world where innocence doesn't exist." Manny studied him quietly. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply listened, his silence giving weight to the confession. "The officer clenched his fists. His voice cracked. Maybe I wanted to believe her. Maybe deep down I did. But I couldn't. I was too tired, too broken, too angry at the world." His eyes darted to the little girl, still holding her father's hand. Shame flooded his face. "I mocked her. I mocked a child because I didn't know how to believe anymore." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some lowered their heads. Others bit their lips, feeling their own guilt rise. Many had laughed with him moments ago. Now they felt the sting of complicity. The officer wiped at his eyes quickly, but it was too late. The crowd had seen. His arrogance had crumbled. What stood in its place was a man, flawed and weary, carrying scars of a life harder than most could imagine. Manny finally spoke, his voice gentle. "I understand." The officer looked up, startled. "I understand," Manny repeated, his tone carrying no judgment, no anger, only empathy. "Life is hard. Pain teaches us to doubt. But don't let pain turn you into what hurt you. Don't let struggle steal your kindness." The words hung in the air, heavy yet healing. The officer's knees buckled slightly, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. He had expected anger. He had expected humiliation. He hadn't expected compassion. The girl looked at him too, not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with the same quiet patience her father carried. Her small smile broke him further, and the crowd, who had once laughed, now stood in humbled silence, their emotions melting with his. The story was no longer about a cop mocking a girl. It was about the brokenness inside all of them, the quickness to judge, the eagerness to mock, the blindness to someone's hidden battles. And Manny, still silent, let that truth sink into every heart present. The street had never been this silent. The officer's confession still echoed in the air, lingering like a bruise on the heart of every listener. The crowd, once amused spectators, now stood as witnesses to something raw and human. But the silence didn't last. A whisper stirred from the back. A teenager, eyes wide, nudged his friend. "Look at him closely. That's Manny Pacquiao." His words rippled outward. "It is him. I've seen that face on posters. Those eyes, the stance. I'd recognize it anywhere." Murmurs spread like wildfire, suspicion turning into certainty. People pulled out their phones, squinting at images, then lifting their gaze to the man in front of them. Every comparison made their jaws drop further. The officer swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance now crumbling under the weight of realization. His heart pounded in his chest. One by one, confirmations began to surface. An old vendor raised his shaky hand. "I saw him fight, years ago, on a small TV in the barangay hall. He hasn't changed. That's Pacquiao. I swear it." A college student, scrolling furiously on her phone, gasped. Look at this picture. It's the same eyes, same jaw. It really is him." The crowd collectively inhaled, their earlier laughter turning into gasps of disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Others simply shook their heads, stunned, that the man they mocked only minutes ago was a living legend standing in front of them. And yet, Manny remained silent. He didn't raise his fists to prove himself. He didn't shout his name to the world. He stood there in his simple clothes, holding his daughter's hand, as if the recognition or the applause meant nothing. The officer stumbled back a step, his throat dry. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. It's really you." His eyes darted around, desperate for escape, but there was none. The truth surrounded him from every angle. The crowd now turned on itself. Shame washed over them. They had laughed, mocked, dismissed, and doubted. Their guilt was heavy, like a chain dragging them down. A woman whispered to her friend, "We judged her because she looked poor." Another man muttered, "We treated her like a liar, when all along she was telling the truth." It wasn't just the officer who felt exposed. The whole crowd shared his shame, And then, unexpectedly, more truths began to surface. A bystander spoke up. "That officer, I've seen him before. He helped a vendor once, stopped a thief. He's not always like this." Another added, "Yes, I know his family, he's been struggling. His mother's sick, he works double shifts just to pay her medicine." The officer's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected anyone to defend him. He had spent so long hiding his burdens under anger and authority that he forgot people sometimes noticed. The puzzle was forming. The girl was telling the truth. Manny Pacquiao was really there, humble, silent. The officer wasn't just arrogant. He was broken, worn down by years of struggle. The crowd wasn't innocent either. Their laughter revealed their own weakness. Layer by layer, the truth peeled back. Manny finally spoke, his voice steady but soft. "You see, we are quick to judge, quick to laugh, quick to point fingers, but we never know the battles others are fighting." He looked at the officer, not with anger, but with understanding. "You are not a bad man. You are a tired man, hurt by life. But don't let your pain become another child's pain." The officer's lips trembled. His knees weakened until he dropped slightly, lowering his head. His pride had dissolved completely. The crowd watched, breathless. They weren't just seeing a famous boxer. They were seeing a father who valued humility more than fame. A man who chose silence over shouting, compassion over pride, and in that moment guilt transformed into something else. Respect. The same voices that once laughed now whispered words of awe. It really is him. And look how he treats the officer. No anger. Truly a champion, not just in the ring. The officer covered his face with one hand, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't mean." Manny placed a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it carried more weight than any words could. "No one knew," Manny said gently. "That is why we should never judge too quickly. Appearances lie, but respect never fails." Tears pricked the officer's eyes. He bowed his head, unable to speak. The crowd was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of mockery. It was the silence of realization, of humility, of change. The layered truths had been revealed. The girl's truth, the father's identity, the officer's brokenness, the crowd's guilt, and all of it led to one clear lesson, one that none of them would forget. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of everything revealed. The officer stood with his head bowed, his pride stripped away, his heart laid bare, before strangers. The crowd held its breath, waiting for judgment, expecting Manny to shame him, to deliver a final blow of words sharper than any punch. But Manny Pacquiao wasn't here to punish. He was here to transform. He stepped closer to the officer, his daughter's small hand still gently wrapped in his. His eyes softened as he looked at the man trembling in his uniform. Then, in a voice calm but strong, Manny spoke. "You have carried your pain for too long, but today let it go." The officer shook his head, tears welling. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I mocked your daughter. I mocked you. I let my bitterness control me." Manny placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We all fall. What matters is how we rise." The crowd shivered. His words weren't just for the officer, they were for everyone standing there, guilty of their own judgment and laughter. The officer's lips trembled. "I don't know how to rise again." Manny's smile was faint but warm. "Start with humility, and start with change." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and pressed it into the officer's hand. The man looked at it confused. "This is for your mother's medicine," Manny said simply. The officer froze. His knees buckled as tears finally spilled down his face. He dropped to the ground, clutching the envelope with both hands as if it were a lifeline. I can't accept this. Not after how I treated you. Please." Manny crouched down, his eyes level with the broken man. "It's not about what you did, it's about what comes next. Kindness is not earned, it is given, and today, I choose to give." The crowd gasped, many covering their mouths as tears filled their eyes. They had expected anger. They had expected humiliation. Instead, they witnessed grace. The officer wept openly now, his voice raw. "I've lived my whole life with fists, raised fighting the world, and now a man whose fist could destroy me offers me his hand." He bowed his head to the ground, unable to contain the flood of emotion. And then, something shifted in the crowd. One person began to clap, then another, then another. Soon, the entire street echoed with applause. But it wasn't the applause of a boxing arena. It wasn't for a championship belt. It was for something greater. It was for humility, for forgiveness, for kindness that conquered pride. The sound of clapping grew, filling the air with rhythm, unity, and awe. Strangers who had laughed minutes earlier were now crying, clapping through their tears, ashamed of their judgment yet inspired by what they had just seen. Manny rose slowly, his daughter smiling proudly beside him. The officer remained on his knees, clutching the envelope, his body trembling as though a lifetime of burdens were lifting. Through the noise, Manny raised his hand gently, signaling for silence. The clapping faded, leaving only the soft hum of the city around them. His voice carried over the crowd. "Never judge someone by what they wear, what they have, or how they look. True worth is not seen with the eyes, it is felt with the heart." Pacquiao. Words struck deep. The officer sobbed harder, bowing his head again, but this time it wasn't shame, it was release. Manny extended his hand, pulling the man up to his feet. Their hands clasped, and in that handshake the transformation was complete. The arrogant cop was gone. What remained was a man humbled, broken, and reborn in the presence of grace. The crowd erupted once more, not with laughter, not with whispers, but with respect. They clapped until their palms stung, until their voices cracked, until the moment carved itself into their memory forever. For the first time, the officer smiled through his tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You've given me more than help. You've given me hope." Manny nodded gently. "Use it well. Rise again. And never forget, power is not in the uniform or the fists. Power is in compassion." The crowd roared in agreement, their guilt melting into admiration. In that moment, justice was not about punishment. It was about transformation. And Manny Pacquiao had just shown them all what true greatness looked like, not in the ring, but in life. The applause still echoed, bouncing off the walls of nearby shops, lingering in the air like thunder after a storm. But Manny Pacquiao did not bask in it. He simply gave a small nod, held his daughter's hand a little tighter, and began to walk away. The officer stood frozen, clutching the envelope, his tears not yet dry. The crowd parted as Manny passed through, their eyes wide with a mix of regret and reverence. They wanted him to stay, to speak more, to let them make up for their cruelty. But Manny's silence was louder than any speech. His daughter looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with pride. She hadn't needed to scream, hadn't needed to defend. Her words, her father's presence had answered everything. Behind them, whispers began to ripple again, but this time, they carried a different tone. He didn't shout. He didn't punish. He forgave. The same people who had laughed now bowed their heads, humbled by the weight of their own actions. The shame of their mockery stung deeper now than any punch ever could. They realized the truth Manny had lived all along. Greatness isn't loud. Greatness doesn't need to prove itself. Greatness walks quietly, leaving a trail of respect behind. The officer slowly raised his head, watching Manny's figure grow smaller with each step. His heart pounded with a new rhythm, not of arrogance, but of gratitude. For the first time, in years, he felt hope, like a spark flickering in the ashes of his brokenness. He whispered into the silence, "I'll do better, I promise." The crowd, too, carried that silent vow. Each of them had seen their own reflection in that moment of judgment. How quickly they had mocked, how easily they had doubted, how blind they had been to truth. And each of them knew they would never forget this day. As Manny and his daughter turned the corner and disappeared into the hum of the city, the story didn't end. It began to live inside the people who had witnessed it. Some wiped their eyes. Others pulled out their phones not to laugh or gossip, but to capture their thoughts before they faded. Today I saw humility defeat arrogance. Today I learned not to judge so quickly. Today I saw what true strength looks like. The transformation wasn't just in the officer, it was in everyone. And as if the scene itself carried a voice, a silent message echoed in every heart. Present, don't judge by appearances. Don't mock what you don't understand. Everyone carries battles you cannot see. Choose kindness. It always wins. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Tell others. Because the world doesn't need more judgment, it needs more compassion. And ask yourself, have you ever been judged unfairly? Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Let this be a reminder. Greatness is not in fists, titles, or uniforms. Greatness is in humility, respect, and kindness. The crowd would remember that day as the day a child's quiet truth, a father's silent strength, and a broken man's confession changed everything. And Manny Pacquiao, he didn't need applause. His quiet exit said it all.